let's just break it down in really simple terms, really broad historical terms. The great industrial powers of the 18th and 19th century were Europe and England, or Europe and, and Great Britain, right? And when they were the great powers, the industrial powers, they have absolutely every right to then be the centers of the pricing regime and the pricing mechanisms for all the great industrial inputs. If they're the great industrial powers, that's what that's it should naturally gravitate there, right? But we don't live in the 19th century anymore. We live in the 21st century, and the great industrial powers of the world are the United States. All rumors of our demise are greatly exaggerated by British press, and China. So the United States and China. And if you watch what's happening in the gold and silver markets today, and why this is being pushed this way, is that China and the United States are saying this is not right. And we're not living with a 19th or 18th or 19th century pricing model and pricing supply chain model of all the major industrial inputs in the 21st century. We're the 21st century industrial powers. We should be pricing these assets.
That's exactly what's going on. Yep.
Okay. So let's start. So if that's your strategic thinking, and you're the Trump administration, and you've got Scott Bessent as Treasury Secretary, then that idea validates the analysis that in all of 2025, Bessent was running an operation to drain the LBMA of all of its gold. We printed dollars and we bought gold with them, and we transported it all to New York. Not tough, folks. And then we did that for the first half of the year. And then when the European Union finally knuckled under to the tariffs and everything else and signed a trade deal, we stopped debasing the dollar, right? And but now the cat's out of the bag that the world is changing. The pricing regime for gold is changing. So gold keeps rallying, and then silver takes over in the second half of the year, because now China shifts in, and the United States and China are running a tag team match on London 2 months, for 2 or 3 months. The United States is off taking the silver, and then it's China's turn, and we go back and forth. And to be honest with you, you can almost chart that with every time the Trump administration and the Chinese talk at the high level. Either Trump meets with Xi, or Bessent meets with his counterpart in China. It always seems to be right around that time, and then all of a sudden the flows shift, right? So, and again, I don't have receipts directly on this, but I know that Vince Lanci does. He's published. He's talked about all this stuff over at VBL's Gold Fix, right? So my good friend Vince always gets a shout out whenever I can, because Vince is doing that forensic work, because he's uniquely qualified to do that work and knows exactly where to look for it. Whereas I would be, it would take me a month to get up to speed to learn this stuff. I outsource that part of my brain to Vince. Vince does the work. He tells me, I tell you. We push it. We push these ideas around the world. So the main point here is that if you look at 2025, first it was gold, then it was silver. Now it's going to be copper, right? And by extension, it's also going to be aluminum and tin and lead and nickel and cobalt and tungsten and this one and that one and all of them, right? Now, what also happened in the second half of the year?
What didn't happen in the second?
Well, okay, no. From a financial markets perspective, what didn't happen? What didn't happen the minute the Fed under Powell didn't cut rates for most of the year?
Right. They started.
Trump forced a trade deal onto the European Union at the end of July.
Yeah.
Right? By September, by the time we get to the September Fed meeting, Powell's changed the Fed's. Gotten rid of the Fed's 2% inflation mandate, moved back to the dual mandate with an emphasis on labor, right? On improving the labor markets, which is right in line with Trump's, American system stuff that my friends over at Promethean Action like to talk about. And so put that into your wheelhouse. The tariffs are working. the revenue's coming in, the real deficit is actually falling. And then we get the first rate cut from Powell in September, right? Yeah, Trump bitches about that he's late and behind the curve, but that's all kayfabe. That doesn't matter. But the most important thing is this. What started in December of 2023, or 2022, sorry, the end of old Japan's monetary policy. So now let's
talk about that.
Now
That's
let's
huge.
square the circle. Now let's square the circle about all the other things that are happening. So what's been my argument about the shift from LIBOR to SOFR? That the Federal Reserve now has control over the short end of the yield curve and U.S. monetary policy, right?
Yep.
We never really had that when LIBOR was the dead end, the cost of capital for global dollars, because whenever the Fed tried to assert that power, LIBOR would force them to interrupt the rate hike cycle, right?
Right.
And the liquidation of malinvestment, as a fig leaf to my formerly Austrian brethren. Now, that's one aspect of it. What's the next thing we need to get control of? What has been Trump's raison d'etre from the American economy perspective? Getting Fannie and Freddie out of conservatorship, back onto the markets, because what's Fannie and Freddie's real role in the market? It's to control the long end of the yield curve, which we haven't had control of since they stole Fannie and Freddie from us in 2008.
Got it.
So from 2008 until 2022, the United States was not in control of its own yield curve. City of London was. The Eurodollar system was.
I'm getting chills. Okay.
Now. So think of it that way. So first, SOFR. Yep. Now you're trying to get, and so if you watch everything that's happened in Congress over the course of the year, I kept saying to myself, why are they acting this way? Why is there so much FUD about Fannie and Freddie relisting and the IPO and all this stuff on FinTwit? Why am I watching this? Why am I watching good, normal people losing their fucking minds left and right over Fannie and Freddie? I didn't even get it. As I'm watching this go through the entire year, I'm like, I don't understand. And then they shut the government down.
Yeah.
And I'm like, over nothing. I'm like, oh, no, they're trying to stop Trump from relisting Fannie and Freddie before the end of the year. Because, so they're burning assets left and right at every turn to stop the Fannie and Freddie relist and return to the market, where they can then, have control over the long end of our yield curve. Trump goes to Asia, ends the war between Cambodia and Thailand, gets Malaysia involved to be the broker on the deal, then speaks to Xi. All of a sudden, it's not the United States that's, mutzing with the silver price anymore. China takes back over. And then he goes to Japan. And did you watch that state visit? Because I did.
I did, but I want you to tell me. Go ahead.
That did not look like, the conqueror coming to deal with his benighted subjects. That looked like a whole bunch of very grateful people celebrating a liberator.
Yeah.
Because his discussions with Sanai Takaishi, the new, Trump-like or Maloney-like sovereigntist in charge of Japan. I was watching Japan closely. The coalition talks between Takaishi and the rest of the other minor parties. And now I have to get into a little bit into Japanese politics to prove this point. But the reality is this: the LDP has been basically the Americans or British creation to keep Japan under control since World War II. We created the LDP. We control the factions within it. There's the neocon, there's the classic kind of British aligned neocon factions, and there's other factions. So Takaishi represented the sovereigntist wing of the LDP, the Liberal Democrats. They had been in coalition after they lost, full control of the country a few years ago. They had to then be in a coalition government with Komeito. Well, Komeito apparently, last I checked, a lot of people helped me with this, have deep ties back to the transhumanist, Davos aligned Chinese oligarchs. Now, so now let's bring in Richard Werner and Princes of the Yen and all of that stuff and the yen carry trade and everything else.
Please.
Takeishi puts Kamieto to the side and takes the smaller, I can't remember the name of the party now, I forgive me, but it basically comes down to the Japanese kill all the Muslims party.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
they form a coalition. So now you have a full-on sovereigntist Japanese government for the first time since World War II ended. Japan has been slowly rebuilding its military. I heard rumors of, and I haven't seen anything since then, but I've heard rumors of two things hit the market multiple while
I heard
Trump
the
was in
same
Japan.
thing. I've heard the same thing. Go ahead.
That Trump is that the Japanese now want to finally seriously open up peace talks with the Russians to end World War II
Yes.
over the Kuril Islands, finally sign a peace treaty. And then second, that Trump is if he hasn't already, has put on the table that he will dissolve the governing council over Japan, that the Japanese government is not even in control of anything. The legislature can pass laws, but it has to go through the governing council that the Allies set up over Japan. And if we don't agree to this, to what they're doing, we can effectively veto it. That's a very British thing, by the way. Most people don't even know about it. I didn't know about it until I heard about it. And I'm like, I don't know that that's been taken out yet, but I know that I'd say by virtue of the fact that it made it into the zeitgeist at all, and for people to talk about it, means that it's part of the conversation of how does Trump finally give Japan its liberation papers. Well, even if he hasn't yet, what he has done is he told Scott Bessent to go and chat with with Kazuo Ueda, the head of the BOJ, at the IMF conference in October, saying you need to normalize monetary policy. You have to deal with inflation expectations. You've got to deal with this. What I'm saying here is this all wraps up in that. So when you saw in December, Powell cut by 25 basis points and Japan raised by 25 basis points, who's the only major central bank raising interest rates? Japan. We still have a yen carry trade, but that yen carry trade is going away bit by bit by bit by bit by bit. And the people, and so what does the yen carry trade do? Going all the way back to what I just said about SOFR helped us get control of the long short end of the yield curve. But if the Japanese are still at the zero bound, there's still plenty of avenue to get cheap dollars through borrowing cheap and ultra cheap yen to keep running the grift on the short end of our yield curve.
Right.
And the yen carry trade, and that loophole's been closed off. Force a capitulation by Maduro in Venezuela, where the silver and gold and copper concentrates that have been taken off the market, never making it to the supply chain, the refining supply chain in Switzerland, to go to LBMA to give them the future inventory they need to be able to underwrite all their stupid, paper games. That goes away. That at the same time, it's a pincer move against China, because China was the one off-taking all that silver, gold, and copper concentrate and going directly to the mining companies and taking that all off the market and sending it back, I think, smuggled in Venezuelan oil tankers. That's my speculation.
Okay. Go on.
Does it now?
I got a bunch of questions. Got a bunch of questions, but go on.
So you just said it's the Great Reset. I'm like, oh, hell yeah, it is.
Good.
Because if the yen carry trade is gone and Trump can finally get Congress to look, he doesn't need Congress to uplist Fannie and Freddie. He can get them back on the New York Stock Exchange anytime he wants. He can do it tomorrow, right? And that sort of Damocles is sitting over an awful lot of people. Okay. So what you've been watching in the trade on Fannie and Freddie and Bitcoin, by the way, has been bombing the price of using why did we see for 5 months old whale wallets in Bitcoin, cold wallets, 10 years old, 8 years old, coming out of the woodwork and dumping shit tons of Bitcoin on the market and taking it down, right, into the 80s, and then and someone's capping the price.
Yeah.
Now I'm watching Bitcoin this morning and it's trying to break above 90,000 for the first time, and in weeks, right? So were they taking Bitcoin and then using it to bomb Fannie and Freddie? Because it doesn't take a lot of money to bomb Fannie and Freddie. And every time it gets above 11, every time Fannie gets above 1150, it only takes a couple of $1 million to bob it back down into the down to the tens. It's not hard because it's a thin market. There's no market there.
Yeah.
So you've got the banks are desperately, who are sitting on all of the a lot of the shares and a lot of the junior preferreds and senior preferreds, sitting on all this shit, desperately trying to get the Trump administration to give them a better uplist price than they want. They want to be paid for their years, and I'm sorry, but they bought all that shit at 80 cents. Fuck off. We don't have to convert any of that stuff because almost none of it's convertible to common. By the way, it's only some of the junior preferreds are actually convertible to common. None of the senior preferreds are. So they can just be paid off as 8% bonds in perpetuity.
Right.
Nothing. Right. The money is irrelevant. But getting Fannie and Freddie back into the market and getting their corporate structures professionalized to the point where they can actually come back into the market to do the work, because they've been run by mouth breathing friggin' apparatchiks. No offense to the guys running Fannie and Freddie, but you're not the best people weren't working at those institutions. As a matter of fact, the best people were never going to work at those institutions because the goal was to keep them dysfunctional for as long as possible, because this all ties into that desperate need to keep the American middle class credit starved.
Yeah.
As well as giving the foreign holders of the marginal foreign holders of our U.S. debt, and in this case, that would be the fucking Bank of England, who between it and its subsidiaries control well more than $2 trillion worth of our debt, that they have openly threatened to use against us if we don't help them take down Russia. They floated that son of a bitchin' thing in after Trump came back from Japan as well. And then Ueda comes out at the December meeting and raises 25 basis points again. What I expect for 2026 is a normalization between American and Japanese debt, that by the end of the year, they're trading within 25, 50 basis points of each other. That we're currently at 375 and they're at 75 basis points. I think the next Fed chair comes in, cuts rates down to 2, but at the same time, Ueda is going to stop, what's the word I'm looking for? Making baby steps towards normalization. He's going to start accelerating the pace, because the long end of the Japanese yield curve has already sold off to the point where now Japanese 30 years are potentially worth buying because they're trading over 3%. Right. 10 years are trading over 2%. Now all of a sudden we're talking about, real money. We're talking about real returns. And the minute now that I think about it, this just popped into my head. What happens when the Japanese 10-year flips to German 10-year?
Money flows to Japan.
Exactly. and if I'm Scott Besson, I don't even care if they sell off the long end of our yield curve in order to threaten us with anything, because in order to maintain the bond spreads between European debt and American debt, which 90% of the fucking Eurodollar market is tied to, they got to allow the German 10-year to rise. So who cares if the U.S. 10-year goes from 4.15 or 4.19 to 4.5 in Q1? Who gives a shit? You know what that does to the German 10-year? It sends it to 3.5.
Right.
And okay, but who wants to buy German debt with a failing German economy and all of that? So all you're doing is actually forcing, all you're doing is forcing those sales at lower prices.
Right. Okay.
And that then gives the room for the Japanese to continue to do what they're doing and unwind all of the short-term, borrow short, lend long carry trades, and just watch them bit by bit by bit go away. Notice how there was no Black Monday after the last Japanese rate hike. The first two times they did it was a big deal.
Yeah.
They unwound. So it was April. It was August 5th, 2024, Black Monday, when they raised up the zero bound, and then we watched equity markets around the world tank. Right?
Yeah.
Because
Yep.
everybody. So the Japanese carry trade had gotten so esoteric that they were now buying cheap yen to pump stocks.
Yes.
Right?
Well, yeah. Yeah. Okay.
During the tariff tantrum, we actually watched them bomb the treasury market, and everybody was buying back their Japanese debt. So there was a massive unwind of a part of the carry trade during the tariff tantrum in April.
Right.
We haven't, and then it's been a steady grind since then. But every day, when I see a concentration of bullshit, right? When I see a concentration of, oh my God, Japan is, look, has anybody looked at the Japanese 30-year? Like when I see that on FinTwit, I'm like, okay, so they're lighting their hair on fire. That's nice. What does it mean? Japan. Like, what does it mean? Maybe it's not the Japanese that are in trouble. It's the people who borrowed all that Japanese debt in order to get access to dollars that they can't get anymore because they have to fund they're funding the oil trade this way. They're funding how they're buying energy and this and that and all of this stuff. I'm not like, this is the limit of my knowledge, folks. This is my limit of my understanding of these markets. So if I start like going off the rails here and I start saying shit that doesn't make any sense to you, it's because now I'm vamping as I try to learn the next thing in the line. But when I look at it all from the big strategic picture, what do I see? I see the end of the Japanese carry trade. I see Japanese liberation walking in lockstep with American liberation from a financial perspective.
Okay, so I got tons of notes here. So I want you to answer the question, and I think I know what you're going to say, but I want you to answer the question anyways.
Sure.
And this is for the people that perhaps don't know. The end of the yen carry trade, why is that? You just mentioned why it's so important, but bring it down a little bit more for me. Why is that so important? And I was one of those people that were shocked that the US equities didn't tank after that because that was the carry trade.
I don't know. Well, maybe it's because a lot of it has been unwound, or maybe it's because nobody's actually been borrowing Japanese yen to buy U.S. equities, and the people who did buy them the first time weren't American investors in the first place, but were shit. But they all had the distinct odor of limey or frog.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would agree with that. Go ahead.
Okay. Now, because then they control the financial media space. I said, I remember going on with Mel K back in July, and I walked into the house on fire that is Melody, and she's like, Tom, I just realized that financial fake news is the worst kind of fake news, and I'm like, oh, you're absolutely right, Melody. Of course they are. Of course it is. And love Mel to death. She's a lovely person, and she's so freaking smart. And that, I think, is what people really have to understand. The whole Bloomberg, BBC, Sky News, Daily Mail, Financial Times, that's a mafia, folks. They control the financial press. They control the way we perceive markets. And what Trump did in 2025 was flip all that on its head and just say, these people are all swimming naked without any, they're swimming naked out there and the tide's going out.
Right.
And so the yen carry trade was the secondary means by which the short end of our yield curve could be manipulated.
That's
okay,
it right there.
So you had to get rid of that.
There.
So that was the I thought I had made that point, but if I missed it,
you did. That's understandable what you just said.
Right. So now this has to be done in order for us to have control of the short end of the curve, and then the uplist to Fannie and Freddie, and potentially getting them out of conservatorship and professionalizing them, gives us control of the long end of the curve. And at the same time, you're creating pincer moves on London between. This is the only thing I think the United States and China agree about. Okay, I'm not trying to paint the Chinese as good guys here, but on this, it matters. And same thing for the Russians and the Americans as far as the pricing of things like tungsten and, nickel and all the things that I mean, Russia produces an unbelievable amounts of uranium and tungsten, nickel, this, gold,
Right.
silver, like all of it, and oil.
Yes.
So what we have to do now, I think copper's next, obvious, or copper's in process, but what's the friggin' final boss of all this? Taking away pricing control of the strategic commodity, the most important strategic commodity away from
Oil.
Europe. Oil, Brent
Oil.
crude,
Yep.
Brent crude.
Couldn't agree more.